There you
So, wait, you gotta wait.
There you go.
There you go.
Yay, everyone! So my name is Mary Flanagan. I'm the inventor of the board game MONARCH, shown behind me. And with me today are two very awesome people who are going to pepper me with questions about the game.
Very good. And so I am Richard Garriott, known to some fantasy gamers as Lord British, the creator of the Ultima series of games. And with me,
I'm Starr Long. I've been working with this Joker here for over 20 years. We worked on a game called Ultima Online together, one of the very first virtual worlds, and we're working on another virtual world and role-playing game together called Shroud of the Avatar. And we're also backers of Monarch, and we look forward to playing it ourselves. And we asked Mary if we could come on camera and bother her. So we're going to bother her.
And not just play. I don't want to just play. I am a backer all the way at the top of the backing categories because I need to be an unwelcome guest. Just that title enough was enough where I need to be it.
Wait, so what is the unwelcome guest pledge?
So I'll let Mary give the description because I've of course read the pledge description is fairly brief about you get to be one of the 8 cards and 8 special in-play personas. But of course I don't know the rules. So please, that would be my first question: is what have I signed myself up for? Well, and maybe you ought to even tell us a little bit more about the game than comes across on the website, other than the obvious fiefdoms and queens at war, so to speak.
Right. Well, yeah, it's really interesting to talk about people's role in the game as they are backers of the game and also the game itself. So Monarch positions players as siblings vying for the throne. So instead of killing off your siblings, like you might in some popular media television shows featuring kings and thrones, you as a player have to prove your worth by building your court and managing the lands better than your siblings. In this case, your siblings happen to all be sisters. So you playing the game will discover that you are playing against your sisters as you vie for the crown. So what happens is each sister is trying to manage the lands and create a better use of the lands and a better court than the other sisters. And there is a market deck that you, as a player, can kind of recruit or purchase, depending on what metaphor you'd like to use, interesting people and items and animals and outfits for your court. An unwanted guest, what Richard will be in the game, an unwanted guest is someone you can acquire and basically sabotage one of your sister's courts because you can send, for example, a boorish uncle or a drunk juggler to your sister. Perhaps you will be the drunk juggler. I do not know, Richard, yet.
Well, I'm pretty bad at juggling, and so even at my best, I do look drunk when I'm trying to.
So I think that's perfectly appropriate.
That's not bad.
Right. So these are these characters who you can actually use to sabotage your sister's court and count against them when they're trying to add up their points at the end of the game. Their victory points, basically, are what we call crowns in the game. So that's the game. The game is interesting for a number of reasons. Obviously, one, we have positioning people as relatives and actually as female relatives in the game. 2, we have these beautiful lands and courts. The artwork is made by a woman named Kate Adams, who's a recent RISD graduate. And Kate is actually creating all of the art on black scratch boards. So she actually scratches off all of those lines that you see in the final art style and creates the original artwork from that. So the whole look of the game, if I will grab the box, the whole look of the game has this texture and feel that's quite magical, actually. So so I'm really excited about that. And also, I think very few board games are not only designed by women but illustrated by women. And so that's another take on this kind of new team we have going at Kickstarter right now.
Well, in fact, that actually then leads to at least another question that I would have, which is, when Starr mentioned you were making this game, both of us were attracted to the game both because of your cred as a game designer, but also because of the female focus and the women's empowerment aspect to it. And that's something we take very seriously, or we try to take very seriously as individuals and as a company, even though we actually don't do that good a job of it, we've noticed over time. It's actually it's really hard as an American male to without doing it consciously, be even keeled in the way you present things. You know, we literally have to go out of our way to not just make characters in our own image, if you know what I mean. And while women, up until now, have often kind of been forced to play games where they played the male role and have probably adjusted to that over the years and may not feel odd about it. You know, I think it's a very good thing that we're now in an era where a lot of males are actually playing female characters in role-playing games and things just cause. And so I think the timing is right to kind of take the stragglers who haven't joined the feminist journey in this very important way yet and push them that way, and then take other people who just haven't had the opportunity to be statistically on the other side of the fence to kind of make people no longer think it's odd to play a game that's all one, all the other, or mixed. Right. It wasn't really a question as much as a comment, but does that seem right to you too? Or was that part of thinking?
One of the interesting things about this game has been for some gamers, especially younger gamers, it's like, oh yeah, cool, that's fine. It's just it kind of feels much more natural, generationally speaking. But for some, especially actually the board game industry has been a little conservative about this. And it's funny, the digital game industry gets a lot of flack for its representation of gender, and there's a lot of discussion about that in the media, obviously. But even board games, if you look at the covers or the boxes of board games, it's not like utopia. So I'm thinking, a lot of people are just kind of ready for that for a new switch. It's just like, oh, let's just play as someone who's unfamiliar. Let's see what that's like. Let's reason like that. Let's problem solve in a different playing perspective. And really, that's the heart of role playing. So I think it's just a kind of natural progression for games to have that kind of flexibility. And as surprising as taken until now to really have this conversation, that's one of the reasons I wanted to make the game. And I wanted to make it for a long time. It's like, oh, I think it's time. If it's not past time, it's time.
Yeah. And the fact that we even have this part of the conversation, of course, with 1 or 2 generations of games after this, hopefully it wouldn't even provoke a conversation. You know what I mean? It would just seem normal.
That's right. But it is provoking conversation on Reddit and among game designers. I even had a game designer, I was at Toy Fair this weekend demoing this game and some other games. Awkward Moment at Work is a new release from the Tilt Factor Lab. And so someone actually said, I know this woman designer in Germany. This is a board game publisher. He said, I know a woman designer in Germany. She uses a man's name to publish her games. Maybe you should try that.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh, yeah, okay, sure. Maybe Klaus is in my future.
Yeah, wow, that's, yeah, well, sadly not surprising, but terrible. Terrible.
Right, it's kind of funny at this point, but it makes one want to have one's Kickstarter be completely successful in the face of those kind of comments. Right?
You said I picked up on a couple things you said when you're describing some of the game that I'd like to follow up on, which is you're mentioning some of the game mechanics. You're saying about building out your court and versus kill off your siblings, and you even mentioned costuming in that pantheon of things you mentioned. Now, as I think of male-dominated game design, of course, it would be difficult to escape killing off your neighbor or relatives. And even though I would be into costuming, that's not always going to show up. That wouldn't classically show up on the guy list. And so, I'm curious if how consciously you avoided some of the traditional guy trappings, and how consciously you chose to choose or exclude what people might historically have thought of as a woman's behavior, as much as just you're just doing a courtly contest and that just fell out of it.
I think some of it was conscious, but most of it's just the way I think about games. And you are not only in costume sometimes, but you even have an axe right now. I mean, we all have. I'm wearing my fur because I am in Winterfell. It is like sub-zero here. I think that and I also have a small dog, so I was interested in having a lap dog in the game, and there's some autobiographical stuff in there. But I think it's also about how people have shown power through time. It's kind of simplistic to say power is always fighting. It's kind of boring and actually not that inventive over and over and over again. We've seen that, but we also see all kinds of interesting human interactions and intrigue and sabotage and showing, look at pop culture and fan culture. You've got people who carry things and wear things in certain brands, and all of that stuff means that somebody has power or somebody has affluence or influence. And so that's what I'm really interested in getting at. Is like, okay, well, how do people exploit their power or use it? And in the game, there are these different paths or strategies you can adopt. So you can adopt a strategy of bounty for managing the lands, for example, and being a really good, land manager. Or you can be very cultured and kind of be in the know about culture and be very well read. And so there are these different currencies that I think we have all around us. We just need to pay attention.
Mm-hmm. And when I think of costuming, I also think of historically how certain colors, royal purple or royal blues, were kept exclusively for the use of the crown. And that was also sort of a way to assert power in a sense of by holding in reserve, the finest things in life specifically are the crown's portion. You sort of make everybody feel like a serf because they're living like serfs.
There you go. It's pretty simple, right? It's like, okay, this symbol, nobody gets to use that one except the emperor. Nope, sorry. Right. That's right. That's right. So it's. I think if we just start to think about this is just the nature of game design, right? It's all about trying to have our games evolve, and if our games aren't evolving, we're not really kind of doing service to our 6,000-year tradition of being game designers. It is a long haul, and it's funny to think about how games change. I don't know if you guys really know much about or are interested in the history of chess, but there wasn't a woman on the chessboard until in the Middle Ages. So chess has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, possibly even thousands of years, without a female character. And the female character was first found in the Lewis chess set from around the 12th century. So even our most traditional games change through time, and they reflect different cultural norms. So.
Well, and you may have heard this from Starr, but on our own game, one of these things where I describe how we fail ourselves, even though we're probably more conscious than most on the subject. But we noticed two things had propagated into our game while we weren't sharply paying attention. One is that all of the guards throughout the game we realized were male. They're just because an artist had to make a guard, and they just naturally. All the guy artists made a guy, a guard, and we also noticed that the default character assumption was Caucasian male.
When you start character creation, the part where you pick like your gender and your skin tone and your hairstyle, all that customization features, the default was a white male. And if you look at pretty much all character creator systems for every computer game there is, they almost all start with the white male as the default. And we didn't even notice it until like one day we were having a discussion about it. We're like, well, why don't we just start it out as a brown female? Why wouldn't you?
Right. So we do now. So
so that's now the default starting point.
Right.
Right. And just think that one thing took a long time to kind of see. So how many other things could we begin to see that would really not only be inclusive but just be interesting for designers?
So obviously without regard to that messaging that might be in the game, of course people are going to buy it based on whether it's a great game or not, fundamentally. And so I'm just curious, what your inspirations were in the following context. My board gaming goes back to the glory days of the early Dungeons and Dragons 3-book stapled together days, and then board gaming in general, or whether they're cards or other physical components, or role playing, pen and paper role playing, I actually think went through a down period, a period where at least I didn't see that much that was inspirational in it. As computer gaming took off, maybe people just weren't paying as close attention to things that weren't on a computer. I think the last 5, maybe 10 years, but at least for the last 5 years, I've seen a real renaissance of game design not on computers, and we do it here at the office. We have people every week here, and in most gaming companies, playing physical component games regularly. And so I'm just curious if you see that same trend and if there have been things happening that have inspired your design.
Yeah, I mean, I was a digital game designer. I had played board games and D&D growing up, but I never designed board games really. Even my earliest games were, in BASIC or some other form of computer land. And I started making physical games about 5 years ago. And most of it was due to a couple of things. One was a constraint about who was going to play when I'm trying to be really inclusive, even though the materials seem like they're not easy to distribute like an app. In fact, more people at that time might access stuff. But the first game that I was working on with my team at Tilt Factor was a game about viruses called Pox, and it was about the spread of viruses, and it was actually for public health people. So they want, what do you put in a doctor's office where people could have a conversation about public health and about vaccinations? Oh, well, this is an interesting game. And that ended up being, I don't know if you can see this, but that ended up turning into Zombie Pox because why not put zombies in it? And in fact, then we did studies. So one of the things we haven't talked about really is how these games, all of them are researched, including Monarch. Monarch, we did a program of research about them, and it's quite interesting the kinds of things we find. I can go into that in a little bit, but let me just answer the board game thing. I think the board game renaissance, I think we can call it that, is great. Board game cafes opening left and right. I hope the business models are solid, and cities are expensive these days, so I hope they stick around. But I think board games help us have different kinds of conversations with each other. We spend a lot of time like this, and it's great to actually spend time doing something with people. I know in my family growing up, we always played board games, visiting grandma after Thanksgiving. We played board games as a family all the time to facilitate conversations, or card games. And my grandmother won, even when she was in her late 90s. Anyway, I have good inspiration for that. 500 especially. So that's the kind of so that is some interesting stuff about, like, I think we it's a time to reconnect physically, perhaps, to real conversations and real people in real spaces.
Yeah, that ties into like one of the reasons I became so passionate about building virtual worlds and multiplayer environments, because I felt like the idea of computer games as a solo experience was kind of the opposite of what a game was supposed to be. A game, if you look at in history, games were social constructs. Right? It was, like you said, it was a method to have the conversation. It was a tool that people used, a set of rules in which to have a social engagement. And so games were social experiences.
Yep, exactly.
Push that book over, by the way.
Oh, that was weird.
It's cool to hear you talk about that games as a social construct, because multiplayer games are, but not in the same sort of physical space that a board game or a tabletop game is. So.
Well, but they do connect us, and they connect us in different kind of conversations, perhaps. But they're still connecting us. And you're right. We still long for connection, and this is why we carry things in our hands like this, right? We want that connection, no matter what. Yeah.
So tell us. So you mentioned the research that goes into the generation of these games that you build. Can you talk a little bit more about that in general, and specifically about Monarch?
Yeah. So I run this game design research lab called Tilt Factor at Dartmouth College, and it started actually at Hunter College in New York. It's been around for over 10 years. And coming from the industry, I was always the annoying person, the producer designer on the team who was like, but why do we know people are learning? And how are they, I was that person. And everyone's like, just let's meet the deadline. And I was like, but why? So that's why I ended up also teaching, because I wanted to do research, and I wanted to ask these questions that I didn't have time to do in industry. And one of the interesting questions with the board game stuff is really, can they and do they and how do they change people's behaviors and beliefs, right? Because all games, that's one of the things I'm very interested in, is how can games influence us to be better people. So I have some games around here somewhere, like Buffalo. Buffalo an Awkward Moment. Buffalo is like this name-dropping game. It's a party game. You just play it. It's a lot of fun. But it also happens to increase people's social identity complexity, which is actually a fancy way of saying it reduces people's racism. So their biases. So you can actually mess with and improve some really important things that if you're not conscious about them, you might be actually doing some harm. So this is what you're saying about, thinking about just being conscious about how, the race and gender of a character when you start a game. How is that influencing us throughout the rest of the game experience?
Now you're saying something that rings very deeply important to me, that I've always applied specifically to role-playing games, but it's interesting that you're applying it to all gaming in a way that I'm going to go back and think about now more deeply. Part of the way I describe that is I say, look, since I'm usually attributing it to role-playing, I say, children role-play from a young age, and whether they're playing Tea Party or Army Men, that role-playing is a way they discover the social boundaries and methods of successful and unsuccessful interaction as a group, as well as things about their, the physical world and themselves physically, and it's good exercise and whatever else it might be tangentially as well. And so I look at role-playing especially as a great teaching tool, and I think whether you are trying or not, I think you will be doing teaching, and the only question is what are you teaching? And while I don't think that it's necessarily a responsibility for all games to have a purposeful thing they teach by all means, I think if you don't pay attention to that, it's not only could you accidentally have some negative or create some negative reinforcement, but it's also sort of a missed opportunity that you've got this vehicle, this platform of to make a statement, to do some good potentially, or you're in a good, bad, or indifferent, so might as well be good. And in my mind, the only way that you can, if you're gonna try to create something that is lasting and valuable, I think there's only one way to pull it off that you've already said a whole bunch and has Starr, which is research. I actually think that the vast majority of game designers, look at a game that they like the game mechanic of and say that's fun. I'm going to make something like that, and there's nothing wrong with that. If the game mechanic's fun, go have a good time. But I'm passionate about doing very long, hard, actual research to inobvious conclusions inspired by things well outside of gaming, to find something you can do within a game that is both fresh and meaningful.
Right. Awesome. I mean, that's exactly. We're on the same page with that. I'm really excited about the kinds of stuff we do, and I have a full-time psychologist, a social psychologist on my lab staff who helps design these really great experiments about how we can really get to the bottom of something. Right. So there aren't a lot of people who really, especially board games, but also digital games, who are really going down to that kind of psychological level of what the player experience is and how it can be, how different things affect it, like different game elements. So, for example, we had this abstract version of Zombie Pox, and then we had a regular version called Pox. Same game mechanics, different representation, zombie faces versus an abstraction. The zombie faces, the zombie version, exact same game mechanics, played in the exact same way in the exact same setting, actually increased players' empathy toward people with chronic illness and elevated the way that they thought about valuing vaccination, how they would fund vaccination, how they would actually change their beliefs and possibly behaviors about vaccination just because of zombies. So, think about that. Think about the zombies, okay? Like that, would you ever say, oh yeah, we're gonna solve this vaccination problem with zombies?
Yeah, it makes me want to call the producers of Walking Dead and have them start doing PSAs about vaccination.
It'll probably work really well, actually.
Yeah, no, like based on this, it's like, wow, that might be the only thing that we could do to combat the anti-vaxxers.
Yeah, they might have to have put a character in the.
Oh wait, I don't want to stray into political territory.
Yes.
So, whoops.
Well, I'm sure even though we're avoiding that particular angle of politics, as we are well aware, even in just game design, there's plenty of politics around gender.
Yeah.
So we're already, I'm sure, in the thick of getting a quantity of support and a quantity of derision.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll be interested in the response,
Yeah.
especially to you, but we'll see.
Yes. Well, you know, it's you know, he is a lord. I mean, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, true.
Well, you know, but it is one of these things where you know, one of my main forms of communication is Twitter, and I enjoy it because I can communicate with a lot of people without having to say much. You know, you're forced to not say much, and when they want to respond, they can't write a giant tome either. They have to respond or ask a question that's also very brief. So for me, it's a very workable solution. And you know, since I use it largely for business, and I'm talking largely about our games, I largely don't talk about, for example, my political affiliations, my religious beliefs, my family circumstances, or things of this nature. It's generally speaking work. But every now and then you feel some social obligation to make a comment on things that you either feel are personally important, and or especially if those things that feel personally important are in fact related to what you're doing as a business. And so I find it shocking that when you know, you cross over from that line into things that really are still within the business discussion because it's related, like gender issues and gaming, and the number of people that the naysayers will say, like, you know, this is none of your business, stay out. You know, and I'm like, this is exactly my business. What are you talking about?
It's literally my business.
Literally.
I get paid to make games, so it's literally my business.
Yes, you are trying to sell things to people.
Right. And guess what? At least half of those people are women.
Exactly.
Because that's how the planet works. That's how biology works, by the way. So you know, so you were talking about some of your previous games that you've made and some of the effects that you were able to do with those games. And is there a goal for having that kind of effect with Monarch? And what would that effect be?
Yeah, well, for Monarch, we did this really interesting little study about taking character representations. This might interest you a lot. Taking kind of more stereotypical representation of female characters, and then more powerful, maybe less stereotypical with some armor representations of female characters. And we ran a study with character representation with an all-boys group. So all male players, and we also did a study of the reveal in the game. So it's interesting when you first start playing the game, you can either know, hey, this is a game about being a woman, as part of the premise, or this is a game where you're siblings. And so we divided the experiment into two groups. One group was playing just as siblings, and then about 16 rounds into the game, or 16 moves into the game. Among 4 players, it's revealed that they're addressed as sisters by a card in the game. And what does that do for the players versus just being told right away this is a game where you're playing as female characters. So it's a question of that kind of level of ambiguity. And so we found some interesting stuff. It seems that according to our data, people really, male players, really find the game far more suitable for both men and women. They like the game more. They're drawn into the game more, and they measure high in this idea called experience taking or perspective taking, which I guess you could say is like the hyper role playing, where you actually are becoming the character and getting engrossed. All of that when the kind of gender stuff or whatever is delayed. So you don't really know. You know your siblings, but you don't really know you're playing as sisters. Or you don't really, you get into the game first, and then.
What do you find on this front too? What's interesting about the early women adopters of computer games, when your character was always male, by default, and if there were female characters, they were barbarian wenches, as was really your only option. And so whether that's self-sorted women who might find that acceptable or not, I think that it is, I believe that it was true, and somebody might correct me if I'm wrong, that a lot of those early women, if they were given a selection of cards or images of which of these women would you like to play as, they still might self-sort back to that same kind of more male biased interpretation. And I would guess that in a more modern era, when people have not been trained to assume that that is the heroic female character, that we be given the suite of which of these do you want to be? Do you want to be the armored character, the noble, powerful, but unarmored character? Do you want to be the buxom wench? Do you want to be the homebody-looking person or mother figure or whatever it might be? Do you find that there either has been a bias or that there's a bias changing, or do you give people that choice?
Well, we haven't done a study on that, so I'd only speculate. But I would always say that there are biases, right, all over the place. So I would just probably say there are biases in what people have already seen before, right? So you just this happens a lot in consumer research, right? People just kind of want what they've seen before. It's familiar, even if that's not necessarily what they would want if they had other examples, right? So there's that problem. The sense of familiarity, and then there's also about what's empowering in the culture, right? So if you don't want to choose a weak character if you're really trying to victor, and if you happen to be really competitive, you're just going to go for the most, the way that you're going to win the game. So there's just a lot of layers to this, and what we tried to do with this study is really start to break it down. It's like, okay, let's just look at representation, not agency with that representation, for example. And then let's look at revealing the character. And then let's look at, so it's this kind of sense of really trying to break down the research into these small nuggets. But it's a larger mission.
And so you were saying that when you had that reveal, there was the person's ability to to put it in layman's terms, step into the shoes of someone else, that ability was measured higher. Is that what I was understanding? Mm-hmm. So the idea would be that by participating in this game and through purchase or pledging this game and then playing it, that you are now theoretically going to have a higher ability to understand or role play or be in someone else's shoes, perhaps.
Possibly. The ultimate goal is to really figure out how we can really encourage players to be not only tolerant of different points of view, but really take them on and see what it's like. I mean, that's the joy of role playing. And so in this game, it is our hope that it works so that that you can really get more immersed in being that character. And by the way, I do want to say, since we're all game designers, sometimes that it doesn't look like it's working for the players. You know how we do so many play tests and we're used to watching people. And one of the things I noticed about this kind of study or this kind of research is when I was watching certain groups play Monarch for the first time, if I didn't have the other data to support it, I would go, oh, gosh, I wonder if that game is broken. I wonder if that's that I'm not sure. I'm not sure that the play flow just didn't break right there when they were revealed that they weren't who they thought they were. But in fact, in the data, it shows that they enjoyed it more, that they engaged more. So what I was watching as a designer didn't actually match the psychological stuff. So that's another interesting thing about this, is that experienced designers may overlook this just because of our experience.
Right. That's interesting, and I think we can sometimes see that too. When so Richard and I will often log into the virtual worlds we make as our character, our alternate personas, Lord British, and then watch play, or sometimes we'll log in as an anonymous character so people don't know who we are. But in both cases, we'll sometimes observe things like you said that where you're like, well, that's not working. But then you go and you look at the data, because we're basically every single game event there is, we're logging it, measuring it. To looking what the trends are, seeing how many times people use a sword versus a hammer, and often, despite what we see, you have to ignore what you see, I guess, is another way to say it. You have to kind of ignore that sort of initial analysis you want to do with your mammalian brain of, well, here's what I think's happening, and that's often wrong.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
It's like these are lessons from Sherlock.
And by the way, as a game designer, that's also one of the reasons why when my publishers or partners have ever suggested that they're going to make sales decisions or investment decisions purely based upon some test groups forms or observations, I'm always very dubious. I'm going, you have to know how to interpret. The interpretation is so important. Another story I tell all the time is the games that I was working on that the people had the least faith in, because I was changing things more than I'd ever changed them before. And so I got active resistance from lots of people around me. Are the games that did the best. In Ultima 4, where suddenly the way to win wasn't to defeat any bad guy, but you had to actually prove yourself to be a good person, and you really couldn't just go kill everybody freely anymore. It was, you're going to be judged based on your virtue. Everybody thought I was nuts, because they seemed to have good data that the games that people loved were the games where in fact, they wrote letters in about how much, after I finished the game, I love to kill you and all the people in the town and all the shopkeepers. And I was going like, well, they may be enjoying that, but that's not. I'm hoping to write a game about being the hero, not about killing everybody. And since I now know that people are not playing the game as I interpreted I was providing it, I'm now going to enforce these rules. And that's just one example of when you want to do something right, it's not always obvious to people around you.
Yeah, this is really great. I think this is great game design, coffee discussion here about like how do we believe ourselves and trust in our design decisions. At the same time, we know that what we're trying to do is kind of breaking the norm. I mean, that's where any kind of game that's trying to push a new boundary, you have to be willing to go there.
Right. Yeah. And you have to, and like you said, you do need to watch the people play. You do need to have the data. You do need to have the observation, and you do need the input of other outside critics. What you have to be able to do is look at it and go, I understand that the reason why you're being a critic is because no game has existed the way I'm describing it, and people are writing in letters about the way they like it the way it was, but no one has been exposed to this new way, and so don't prejudge it based upon the fact that we're going into new territory. And that's very hard for investors, salespeople, marketing people to really understand.
Well, now we can back each other up here.
Well, it's interesting. It kind of loops back to what the beginning of the conversation was, where you're talking about going to Toy Fair and the person saying, well, maybe you should portray a male character and be kind of like, and if you had gone to like a traditional game publisher, they'd be like, love the game, but instead of sisters, it should be brothers.
Yeah. And instead of managing the land, we should kill each other.
Well, and so I'm guessing one of the motivations of going through Kickstarter, which is kind of why we're here talking today, was that ability to kind of forge ahead and leverage the community, and or is it a different motivation to go to Kickstarter?
No, I mean, first of all, there's no grant research funding Monarch. It's really a labor of love, and so it's really not going to live unless we get community support. But another thing is to really engage the community. I go to a lot of independent game, both digital and analog, indie game scene, and everyone's like, Kickstarter, check out my Kickstarter, support my Kickstarter. But then I started this Kickstarter. It's awesome. I'm having a great time. I'm meeting a whole new groups of people, including talking to you guys again and connecting, which hasn't happened in a long time. And Richard, I think we met maybe in the 90s at a party, but like a long time ago.
Yeah,
like a long time ago. So that's really interesting. But on the other hand, there's some caveats, right? So Kickstarter isn't this egalitarian place either yet. I think it can be, but it's we've got to get more voices making games and getting them funded there. Right now, I think there is about 7,000 game projects launched by women compared to 67,000 game projects launched by men. So that's a big difference.
Well, but it is an interesting problem, and so there's multiple layers of this problem. Just like I'm sure you're familiar with Title IX in the United States, where schools started having to spend the same amount on girls' athletics as boys' athletics, and once they did that and graduated a group of women, sports participants, that suddenly professional sports also started taking off, and so you have to fix it at many levels before it will be resolved, but even for us here as a company. We have, in our total history as a company, we've only had a handful of female employees. and it's really not from a lack of trying. We really would love to employ more women at our company, and even down through the 40 years I've been making games, I can reflect on women we have hired, and especially in the super technical roles, programming in particular, and you almost never get a resume. And then just statistically, when you do get a resume, resumes are somewhere in the statistics of the best person and the worst person. So you're only trying to hire the top 5%. So if a woman comes in with an average resume, she's not in the top 5%. And so it's a really difficult problem that is part a consumer problem, part a designer problem. We've really got to attack it at all those levels. It's going to take a generation at least to really wipe it out.
But I will say it's also part of a psychological problem. There's a study after study, year after year. They do the same study where you get a resume by a male and a female, it's the same resume, but you change the names, and there's like a 40 to 60% perception gap in our own heads. And this goes for male hiring managers as well as women hiring managers. It's just some of this stuff is in our heads, and some of it's real. So we have to talk about fixing it on a lot of levels. Wow, it's a big problem, but we can do it. Things have changed in the world. There is a woman on the chessboard, and she's the most powerful woman.
Right, and I think that one of the best ways to solve these problems too is to kind of just sneak them in. The fact that if you think about, no matter what we defaulted our character to be, more than 50% of the people are not going to be that specific default, right? So already 50% of the people on Earth are women, and I can't remember, and even in the United States, Caucasian male may not be either. It's close to not being the statistically most accurate male people. So somewhere between half and 3/4 of the people are not going to be that thing we would have defaulted to on our own, and so. Who cares if we make it? It really doesn't matter what you started as. Whatever you started as, people are going to need to change it. They're going to want to change it. Hair color, eye color, tall, short, whatever it is, they're going to want to change it. And so, just that little change of quit assuming that it's a Caucasian male. I think each one of those little pieces, I think, is really important. And don't get me started on women's last names. I'll have to make a speech.
It's true. It's true about the idea of little things. I mean, even changes in the dialogue might shift perceptions, right? So, even pronouns. Who knows?
Yeah,
absolutely. So, how's you were mentioning that Kickstarter? You've met a lot of people and making connections, and is this your first crowdfunding foray?
It is. It's my first Kickstarter. We're over halfway there for our first goal. 23 days left. Over halfway. So, pardon?
How many days?
23
remaining. So yeah, I think you're in good shape then. So as you've probably already seen, there's this initial bump in the very beginning. Then you go into a lull period in the middle, and then a bump at the end. And the bumps are pretty similar in scale. So it's always harrowing through that middle period.
I'm in the middle period of harrowing, but but hopefully this conversation will excite some viewers.
Absolutely. So in fact, I know our player base is very forward-thinking. I mean, I really do believe we have an extremely forward-thinking community. I know this is the sort of thing that they just spiritually would want to get behind, and I know, having been through your site myself when I became a backer, I know there's plenty of information there for them to be able to peruse and look at the style of gameplay, and I know a good chunk of our players, just like a good chunk of our employers, are gamers that are playing physical component games every week. And so I hope and encourage our community to go and at least take a look and back it if they are so inspired, which I hope many of them are.
Yeah, and just speaking of being inspired to back, anybody who's watching this, just remember that you're really in an amazing time. Like, this whole idea of crowdfunding, which isn't a new thing. It started with making books. You actually have a crowdfunded book from the Middle Ages, where it was, actually Renaissance, so it was the way of, to publish books, you'd go around collecting money, and you'd list them in the credits, and that's how books got published, was through crowdfunding. But this, you know, you were talking about the renaissance of tabletops, is crowdfunding. We're in this time now where it used to be, because even in that crowdfunding, it was really only wealthy people. Like the average person wasn't going to make a book get published. But now we're in this amazing time where just about any person who has the means, you know, they have some money, can help will a product into existence that would not have existed otherwise. And literally until now, you know, in the last 10 years where crowdfunding has really started to happen, the only way it was going to happen was through more traditional funding methods, where either you were going to find a really rich patron, you know, or you were going to get a round of investment from investment capital, or you were going to have a larger company who was going to fund your work, all of which help, you know, created this world where only certain kinds of products are made. Right?
Well, they reinforce the status quo. They're very good at saying, oh, look, a movie or a book or something did well, let's make a sequel.
Right.
And if not literally a sequel, at least one that we know fits the pattern and fits that same client, because we know that client exists. We know how to market to that client with this particular type of material. And what they're very difficult at doing is predicting an audience for anything that isn't that. And they're also very risk averse for going anywhere that isn't especially comfortable. And that's especially true because, you know, if you think about products, and one of the, at least in the computer game side, you know, one of the stories I often tell too is that we have about 1,000 titles that are released as a computer game every year. But by the way, that number has been similar throughout the 40 years of the industry. And another piece of data is that only the top few are the ones that are the most successful, the top 10%. And really, if you look at it as the top 10 individual games, you know, the top 10 games earn 90-some-odd% of all of the money. And so once you're outside the top 10, you quickly get into you're losing money for doing this. And so the big companies, you know, that is an enormous amount of pressure to be risk averse, because it almost always ends badly. And especially if they put a bunch of money, you know, there's so many examples of big companies putting $100 million into a computer game that was attempting to do something new that didn't work, because again, there's only 10 successes and 990 failures. And the wonderful thing about crowdfunding is it sorts out at the crowdfunding moment. During the crowdfunding process is where you find out, is there an audience or not? And you also find out the scale of that audience, and so it self-tailors to something that is scaled appropriately to these audiences that otherwise would not be served at all. And it's the way that we will uncover great new ideas for growth in the future.
I agree. It's almost like you get a vote for what exists.
Yeah, which never happened before. It's really incredibly exciting, and a lot of responsibility that people now have. It's great.
Right. And it's a new mindset. So I'm really excited to be part of this whole world.
Cool. Well, we're glad you're there too. We're very excited about the product. I mean, the last thing I wanted to talk about was when Richard and I were talking about, you know, when we saw the game and we wanted to get on there with you. I mean, we both have actually a very personal motivation for this, because we're both fathers now of very young daughters. So my daughter's 4, Kinga's 2.5. So we have a personal stake in, you know, making sure that we hopefully they grow up in a culture that, you know, is reinforcing strong female figures, trying to, you know, get rid of some of the things that we're saying, that the biases that exist in people's heads. And
well, daughters have been a really great motivator, right? Will Wright had middle school age daughters during the Sims production too, right? Younger daughters during the Sims. I mean, daughters may be changing the face of gaming more than anybody.
Oh, that's actually, I hadn't thought about that. That's actually
very true.
Yeah. It certainly helped make me more aware, for sure.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you guys so much, and we will share this with the wider world and share Monarch as soon as it's out this year.
Can't wait to play. Can't wait to be an unwelcome guest.
You are so unwelcome, Richard.
Very excited.
Bye.
Bye.